Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first webinar of 2022. My name is Yasmin Alamango. I am the Marketing Manager here at Candatis. Wish I could get my words right today. This webinar will be recorded, and you'll get a link to the recording as soon as it's uploaded on our YouTube channel. We'll also share a link to the slides for those that are interested, and that will be in our follow-up email at the end of this. Towards the end of the session, we'll do a short Q&A. So if you do have questions while we're presenting, just feel free to use the chat and drop your questions in there, and we'll get to it at the very end. So I'd like to welcome my colleague, one of my favorite colleagues in the company, Gillian Jones. She's our Senior Business Development Manager at Candatis. And for today, we'll be covering just some of the work that we've been doing and the state of identity for higher education and opportunities that Microsoft's Azure AD Verifiable Credentials brings. So Gillian, do you want to kick off and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. And you're one of my favorites too.
Okay.
Um, yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. It is really nice to be talking about this subject. Prior to my tenure at Candatis, I actually worked for a higher education technology company. So education and technology within education has been something that's really of interest to me. And as soon as I came to Candatis, the whole matchup between the education space and what we're doing in identity and identity going forward and just the growing importance, it just seemed like a marriage made in heaven. So I'm really excited that we are doing so much work in this area, that we are so heavily partnered with Microsoft and really working with them on such an important and growing area. And yeah, excited to get into it today.
Fantastic. So one of the major elements, I suppose, that we've seen in general, which has maybe hindered or helped progress innovation, I guess, in higher education, has been actually, dare I speak of it, the pandemic.
Yeah.
So would you like to set the scene in sort of what have you been seeing with with clients right now and in general in the industry? Because you're involved in sort of a number of different sort of spaces.
Yeah, that's it. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, that's for sure. Um, I think what's been really interesting about particularly higher education is that traditionally the potential impression, may I be so bold as to say, is that there might be some legacy systems. It's not necessarily innovation is a really desired state, but it's not necessarily easy to attain. Sometimes it can be difficult to kind of transition from legacy systems into kind of, cloud environments or new solutions or whatever it might be. And I think that, obviously when we were all housebound and people couldn't get to colleges, couldn't get to campuses, couldn't get to school and all of the challenges that entails, it actually presented a golden opportunity for universities that had to innovate. They had to change working practices. They had to change the way that the models were running, and therefore had to adopt technology and implement it really quickly. So I think that innovation is now something that is known, that can be executed against, it can be done, it can be embraced, and it doesn't necessarily break everything. So I think that there's been a huge change in not just the desire to kind of innovate and be innovative, but there's also been the ability to be that, to actually do the do of implementing new solutions and technologies. So I think it's a really exciting time for the higher education and just generally education space going forward.
Yeah, I mean, what gets me thinking in general is like everybody's tried to find some way to make it through just the pandemic and what it caused for businesses. And I think of all the students that have been maybe in the middle of their education, halfway through, maybe they're at their third year, they're trying to get their degree, they're so close to graduation. Here comes this
Yeah.
horrible, horrible thing that just sidelines everything. And it makes you wonder, well, how can things be better for them? Because now we are in a state of hybrid working across the board, whether
Mm.
that's your corporate industry or a university and a student.
Mhm.
So we see from places like Gartner who have done the research, they have their own set of clients that they work with on finding ways to innovate. And yeah, you have physical classrooms. Yes, you have online classrooms, and you've got all the different skills that you can attain. But what about this third way? What about
Yeah.
this new way of working and just in general, what are you seeing through the work? Because we have some really exciting projects, which we'll go into detail about later.
Yeah.
And so I want to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, and you're right. I think that the hybrid world and what we're seeing, it does transcend kind of every vertical, right? This is just going to be the new norm going forward, and I really think it presents like an opportunity to potentially jettison some of the stuff that wasn't so great. Really focus on that in-person experience where it's really necessary. Like obviously, we're in the office today, and it's great when we're doing collaborations or we're kind of getting into a project. It's great to be able to sit across from the table from our clients, and sometimes things generate more organically that way versus virtually. However, like I have a young child, so being able to work from home and actually manage nursery and pick up, drop off and pick up, and those sorts of things like are so much better facilitated for me as a person. That the whole idea of hybrid working really really works for me. So I think that actually before education generally, if we think about our school education, our university education, it's very prescriptive, right? You learn a curriculum, you learn certain things, and it kind of gets taught in a specific way. So again, I think that the hybrid model allows people to be in person, allows people to be remote, allows people to engage with the content and the kind of the courses the way that they would like to. So again, I think that actually the opportunity is huge, and I think that it's going to be great going forward. But obviously, with every opportunity, there are always challenges that come with it. But I'm hoping that a lot of the kind of the shock and the sheer magnitude of change is now bedding in, so that we can kind of start seeing the real impact. And I do think it's so important to be able to support different learning styles, different learning preferences, different situations. As I say. And I think that the hybrid world is really going to facilitate that. So it's exciting to see how that will happen.
Brilliant. So in general, you've got students now being that open with so many applications that let you learn. Um, it's open to such a realm of people all across the world, and you're thinking, okay, in my case, I'll use myself as an example. I was an international student,
Mm,
having a degree qualification in one country, non-English speaking country, and I come to the UK and there's a bunch of stuff that I have to prove. And it's all of my history of education from high school, from professional development to university and beyond, and even further
mm,
higher education. Um, and you just wonder, well, how do I share that in a way that's actually secure and credible? And how can students actually have that as
yeah,
this is me as a whole, and I want to share this data with you, and I want you to accept it with the same weight and
yeah,
credibility as you do when I walk in with my physical transcript and my degree certificate, and you go, yes, okay, fine, this is approved. I mean, it's impossible that we in this day and age give people so many blockers and hoops to jump
yeah.
through to just do it. So how do we make this more secure and credible?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And, for those that have spent any time with me or will do in the future, which obviously would be lovely on the back of this webinar, I will continuously talk about anchor points. And for me, identity is an anchor point. So you have your experience from that kind of international aspect. I was fortunate enough to get a couple of degrees. So I've moved around the country. I think for me, the constant is me, right? And the constant is my identity. So I think that what's going to be really interesting going forward is understanding that university is a period of your time, employment is a period of time, moving to a different employer is another. These are all component parts that become things that attach to you and me as a person. So going forward, I think that that's the anchor point. It's understanding like I am who I say I am. I have a variety of things that link to me, but the technology that we're going to talk about today, and the use of verified credentials, and particularly through Microsoft, like it just enables me to be that anchor point and my identity to be the constant. I can share it with whoever I'd like, how I would like, and I can actually share the pieces of information that are pertinent to the question that I am asked. So I think that it's really going to be interesting going forward, where from an educator's point of view, you have people coming, as you say, from various parts of the world, and not everyone can be experts at every school or every you know um like awarding body. Like, what, I don't know what all the exams are, and I appreciate that it's not my full-time job, but either way, it's just such a range of like known quantities, unknown quantities. There's obviously different ways of learning now. And more importantly, the pandemic has forced people to look at, not just qualifications, like the external parts of the person, the other attributes that they're bringing. And I think that, as I say, if all of that's anchored to your identity, you then have the ability to look at like the person as a whole and really understand, who they are, where they're coming from, what they're bringing, and really run on, a system where trust is already established. This is not a brand new technology that doesn't have any governance, that doesn't have any frameworks around it. This is all really well established and evolving, but well established, meaning that it's something that can, be implemented and really kind of capitalized upon today. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That is excellent. No, I do love the whole idea that, I am who I am. This is my ecosystem. These are the parties that I have uh, interchanged my data with. They hold my data, they've approved it, and now I want to carry this with me forever, really, from my life cycle in university and out of. So now going forward, we are talking about Microsoft and the opportunities that it brings. So how can those opportunities be used to actually enhance student journeys with Microsoft? We've done a fantastic proof of value with RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia, and that was fantastic. And I'm just wondering if you could talk the audience through sort of what we covered, what the user journeys were, and just generally what other opportunities exist out of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, you're right. In partnership with Microsoft, we were lucky enough to work with the fabulous team down in Melbourne, and despite time zones and everything, it's been a great experience, and have nothing but great respect for their desire to innovate, and also their kind of real open-mindedness to the technology and the opportunities that it presents. So essentially the proof of value was relating to kind of three main things. So first of all, it was about establishing that identity of the student. And as part of that, it would be obviously kind of looking at replacing the plastic cards, and people having their own digital identity on their phone, which is obviously massive for sustainability, which is cool. But it was also not just establishing the identity; it was establishing that identity and then allowing it to be used to unlock discounts, for example, on campus. So I'm going to cough. Excuse me. Good old lingering COVID there. Thanks very much. Um, so yeah, so that was basically unlocking kind of incentives and meaning that the students were empowered to actually engage with technology. Secondly, we were looking at training credentials, so using the same technology that we'd use for the students, but actually for the staff of the university. So again, showing a little bit of the versatility, but also the scalability and usability of the platform, I guess, across various user groups. And then the one that kind of really piqued my interest was around alumni, so people that are out with the university digital ecosystem at that point, being able to log back in and kind of receive their transcripts once they'd actually kind of exited the digital side of things.
Fantastic. So, on Microsoft's perspective, all these three user journeys are actually built within Authenticator, really, Microsoft Authenticator. Um, and that is something that they can just revoke. Can they carry it? Can they exchange it? How can they actually use that data from their wallet, really?
Yeah, exactly right. So ultimately the kind of the overarching principle here is that I own my identity, right? The student is in charge of their identity. They can accept information that RMIT wanted to share with them. They can reject it. They also have the management side of it. So for example, we've all been there, we've all had a lovely night out, and we may or may not have misplaced our phone. So obviously that is then has a credential associated with it. So there's abilities to do a number of things around the management of the credentials, yeah. And they're also not necessarily always static, right? These can have multiple different attributes in there. These can be things that get added to. So for example, I'm a third year student, but obviously I'm moving into the next like level of my qualifications. These things can also kind of all be handled within the credentials. So super flexible, super scalable, and ultimately because they're all built on Microsoft Azure, we get to benefit from all of the great security and infrastructure work that Microsoft obviously have, funnily enough, spent more money than Candatas have on. So that's fantastic.
Fantastic. We do love our partners at Microsoft. They always
Yeah,
help us innovate with our customers. It's great stuff.
for
Um,
sure.
so when we look at these sort of student journeys and the different scenarios on all three of those screenshots, I just want to, for the benefit of the audience, because obviously we've gone through this with our customers, but for
Sure.
them, do you mind walking through some of the examples of, for example, issuing a student card? happens on that stage? How much of the responsibility lies with the student? What happens after that? What else can they use it for?
Yeah. So again, and we can dive into it in a little bit more detail. And I do not pretend to be a Microsoft expert. I'm obviously a grateful recipient for a lot of the information that we get. But for example, we know that through some of the Microsoft platforms like the OpenEDGE Analytics and others, we can leverage a lot of that infrastructure to access student information systems and other data sources that are already in existence within the university or school or college environment. And basically what that means is that, if you already have a concept of of who that student is, and they already have like a digital presence, it means that you can extend that and apply the verified credentials and all the stuff that comes with that as part of that product suite. So it's pretty exciting. um, it's really a case of the student saying, yes, okay, I'm going to accept that identity, and then understanding that that can be used, as you say, within that ecosystem. So I know that we were laughing about it the other day, but you know, you need to empower students to embrace this. And I remember when I was a student, and I will not disclose when that was because I mean, God, that's a state secret, right? But
It was just
you know,
yesterday. No.
so recent, so recent. Um, you used to, as part of showing your matriculation card, if you went to say McDonald's, you would get a free hamburger,
Mhm.
which, or in my case, cheeseburger. But which was great, especially if you'd had a particularly raucous night out the night before, and that's great. But it's funny now that I'm obviously working in identity. Don't get me wrong, the ability to prove my identity and get a benefit, I am all in for. That's fantastic. But the sheer volume of information and the value of the information that was contained in that matriculation card to get a cheeseburger is so disproportionate in terms of what we're willing to share versus what that particular benefit in return is. So I think that what I love about this is that you've got the ability to have your student ID. You've got the ability to share the parts of that ID that are relevant. So, such as I am a currently enrolled student. Okay, therefore you get a discount or you get a cheeseburger. But you don't have to share your date of birth. You don't have to share the course that you're on. You don't have to share the halls that you're potentially staying in, and certain things that can be associated with a matriculation card. So for me, it's all about not only empowering the student to understand that this is a good thing, but actually making them super cognizant of all of the information that they've potentially been oversharing, as we all do on a regular basis. So yeah, it's really interesting.
It's a really interesting behavior that we've all at some point, maybe for us
Right?
who now work in identity, are a bit more cautious. But before this, you think of the amount of stuff that you do overshare, and you think about it, you're just like, I've just given my ID with my address, with everything else, my date of birth, as you said, what subject I'm studying in, what hall I'm staying at, and the person behind the counter, Jim, Sarah, whatever the name is going to go, don't really need to know all this stuff. You also don't know who they are. So
Yeah. Or maybe they've taken note. That's always
have they
scary. Yeah,
stolen my details?
sure. No.
Can they copy the card? It opens up a whole new sort of set of risks that are just unnecessary. But now when you think about, okay, by doing something like this, you're simplifying other things. And
Yeah.
here I think about people who have very specific qualifications.
Yeah.
And if you think of somebody who's in maybe medical school or
Mhm.
engineering, something that requires them to have very, very particular exams that they have passed. And, pandemic as an example, they're halfway through finishing. They're trying to get a job. They're trying to get to that next stage of their qualification. They don't have a transcript yet.
Mhm.
How can they actually prove that? Look, I've sat these exams, I've done
Yeah.
the training, I've passed it, and it's from a reputable organization. It's from a reputable university, and it's a government approved course or whatever is the case. So with the qualification storing in the wallet, can you sort of give us an idea of how that can be shared across the different parties in an ecosystem?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. So again, it comes down to kind of the awarding body and how this needs to be broken down. So, for example, you could have your full degree transcript, but you could also have credentials that are based upon module completion or a specific attainment record that you decide that you would like to kind of award on that basis. So, there's a lot of flexibility. But you're right. In England, you could do 2 out of your 3 years, in Scotland, 3 out of your 4 years, and technically speaking, I mean, you're more qualified at that point than you aren't. Yet you wouldn't necessarily make it all the way through to the kind of degree side of things to get that rubber stamp, but you still
Mm,
have a number of qualifications. So I think it's really interesting, when you kind of get into the nitty gritty of what the attributes can be, because obviously, you know, for something like a medical qualification, you will potentially have, you obviously need to do core components, but you might have levels of a core competency. So you might have level 1, 2, 3, with 3 meaning that you are, assessed, reassessed, and then assessed for a third time. So you
yep.
can have things such as like stackable classes or stackable kind of elements to modules that can be understood. But then I think about my own degree, and I mean, it's really relevant. I did international relations and politics, as you can see, working in Edinburgh and everything. It's been really, really useful. um, but like my degree wasn't quite so binary. Like I did a lot of politics, I did a lot of sociology, psychology, and philosophy, economics. Like there was so many different things that kind of made up my degree. So in some respects I have this degree which is its individual thing, but actually there's all this complexity that feeds into it. And again, being able to kind of show that in a credential or share different parts of it, you can say, well, actually, yeah, I did a few modules in economics. Like I feel that I understand certain concepts, da 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 da, and that might be able to be brought out down the line within employment. That, as I say, your degree might not even remotely kind of talk to. Just because I have a degree in politics doesn't mean to say that I would necessarily have any sort of understanding of economics, although obviously that was part and parcel. So I think that it gives a great level of granular detail is required. It also kind of puts the onus on me to be accountable and responsible for the
Hmm.
for my own identity and the things that are linked to it. And then also when this gets shared. And like I say, if I can show that I've got kind of 2 years out of 3 under my belt to an employer, that's on them to say if they are going to accept that level of qualification. And it just means that you've got more to prove, or more provable points, I think, going forward.
Absolutely, because to be honest, a student is beyond just their transcript, their final
Massively
living
so.
transcript. They are beyond that, and the skills they attain throughout their like entire student life cycle is just it's amazing, and how empowering this could be for somebody to just have that in their hands. And again, our third use
Mm,
case when we start thinking of graduates and going forward into the workforce, they're now kind of adapting to a new form of technology that coming down the line, if their workplace actually uses something like this, it's not a shock. It's just like it is just the way of doing things now,
sure.
which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Do you want to walk us through just in general the alumni transcript aspect of this? Because there's also alumni who decide to come back in and work for the university too.
So my understanding, and again, I am very happy for anyone on the call to have a discussion and explain to me why I am wrong in my thinking. But my understanding is that alumni can be, kind of fraught with complexity. So, firstly, strictly speaking, once you've left a university, you are no longer part of that kind of university IT ecosystem. So, your university email address, for example, is no longer active, yet that's still something that's associated with your identity,
Hmm.
things like that, right? So it's difficult. So you kind of go out with the walls of the university, but we want to retain that relationship. And I remember particularly when I did a lot of stuff in the US, and it always kind of blew my mind that you would have the undergrad schools and the graduate schools, and they effectively, I mean, they could not be more different, right? It's like apples and pears, but to the point that they would have completely different IT systems. They would
Yeah.
have different CRMs. They would have different ways of doing, admissions. They would have completely different infrastructures. Yet if I was going from an undergrad to a graduate degree from the same university, in theory, with the same name, and it's like campuses over here and campus over here, they're next to each other. How, to my mind, it doesn't make any sense that those could be totally different, yet they are. So I think what's been really interesting, and again, I know that we spoke about this not that long ago. I had to present my degree certificate starting at Candatus. Fine, no problem. Apart from I've been through a few house moves, and really locating them was quite a challenge, although I managed to do so. But it's like being able to have that information on my phone, which means that I can still engage with the university where I studied. I can maintain that kind of direct relationship with them and them with me. But more importantly, when I do need to ask them for something, I can ask them for something that is a bit more than what can be stored on my phone, right? The amount of admin burden, the amount of data, like the data security that is required to store all of this information for, I don't even know what the required duration is.
Hmm.
But this is stuff that's valuable, right? And it just seemed to me that when we did this particular credential, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. It means that if I'm phoning up my university to try and get some information, we can actually start talking about things that are a lot more kind of either revenue generating. Would it be something I would like to contribute to the university, whatever it might be, versus, hey, can I get my transcript, and that taking 4 weeks and goodness knows how many man hours to try and find. It's things like that that I just think the technology is just so great at facilitating, because I'm in charge of it. I'm in charge of what I own and what I have on
Absolutely.
my phone, and I'm not relying on other people that, as I say, don't know anything about me to produce a document or a piece of paper that is probably might not be reflective, right?
So I'm a little like you. I don't like not having that control for myself.
Mm,
And based on what you were saying in terms of moving, it got me thinking of, yeah, you know what, like I said, I was an international student. I moved, came to the UK, wanted to do my postgraduate,
mm,
and going to university then goes, oh, but the university you studied at it was in a foreign country where English is not the first language. So you need to issue us with this exam that you passed.
mm,
Now, this is the second awarding body. This is not even the university themselves. It's another official body and another credential that says I can speak English. If they picked up the phone and spoke to me, as we can see, I speak English. I should be okay.
yeah,
But they still want this piece of paper. And with all that traveling, I'm sitting there going, where is my document? I passed the test, I put it
yeah,
somewhere, I moved 3 countries. I don't know where this silly document is, but you have to find it. It's like, do I now have to go through the just horrendous experience of sitting on hold, going, I want my result and my grade to show I can speak English so I can go to college again.
yeah. No, I
Like,
know. I think it's those real world examples when you kind of have those light bulb moments of, oh my goodness, like the solve for this is here and this is really important. Like, no, I totally agree. And yeah, I think that experience, and yourself, obviously you work in marketing, like a brand is really, really difficult to build. It's
yes,
long and it takes a lot of work, but to damage it's so easy. And these are
bricks
the
like
things
that.
that, yeah, and these are the things that leave a bad taste in your mouth, right? Like it's frustrating. And again, like kind of talking a little bit back to the hybrid world that we're now living in, like I think our expectations are different as well, right? We're used to being digital first and having that ability to access information, and it be quite straightforward, to then not be able to do that in such a straightforward scenario where you would think like, it's my information, it's my data, it's my record, like give it to me now.
Absolutely.
And that not being kind of matched up is yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult yeah, it's a difficult solution to find, but I think we managed to find it and prove it out. So it's so exciting.
It is an exciting time, especially, and you touched on it earlier. You were talking about this just
Mm.
general ecosystems of student, university, employer. And to be honest, there's even more people that are part of that ecosystem that aren't
Oh,
even
for
on
sure.
this. We're talking about the places that you're getting student discounts. These are retail suppliers that are working hand in hand with the university to issue students with something, some service. Um, and it's crazy to think about this constant flow between external, you're onboarding and you want to simplify that onboarding process, then internal, and you want to make sure that you're maintaining all those records and credentials accurately and in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
And then external again, and you might come back into that loop at some point, you might not. But do you think this model is sustainable, and has the new model that we're seeing with verifiable credentials, does this actually wipe this out?
I mean, for me, yeah, I think that this is probably like a fairly traditional walk through identity as it currently it has been in the past. And I think that this is completely changed, because ultimately, we've got external and internal identity, and that means something in terms of management, data, all of that stuff, right? Those terms have got responsibilities associated with them. Like I said before, and as I say, I'm a broken record. Like if I make my identity the anchor point, then it doesn't matter if I'm internal, external, employer, employee. Like I'm the constant there.
Hmm.
So it allows me to kind of manage where I share that information, and what I share. And like we're talking about before, like revoking it or whatever it might be, I think it just takes this diagram and just squashes it and puts me at the center of it, and I'm all for it.
I think that's brilliant and such an empowering thing.
Mm,
Now, when we talk about empowering, one of the champions of people that we've seen have been Microsoft.
yeah.
You know, we I love the solutions that they're bringing out. We are lucky as gold partners to have the sneak previews of things. So we do see what's ahead of the curve. But in general, could you give us a bit of a heads up as to what we're seeing in the education space for Microsoft? Because there's some interesting stuff that you've put here. But just walk us through this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest kind of testaments to what we're talking about today is that, Microsoft are undeniably one of the biggest companies in the world. And, I think that, well, everybody knows Microsoft, I think pretty much. But more importantly, they cover pretty much every vertical that there is. They would have customers in every single space. And they've identified higher education and education generally as being one of the key verticals that is primed for this technology.
Mhm.
And it's one of those ones that, if Microsoft turn around and say this is a really good thing, it's maybe not the best idea to ignore, because it obviously means that there's an awful lot of credence behind it. They don't say that those sorts of statements lightly. So again, and I know we're going to share the slides out afterwards, but this is kind of Microsoft walking through that solution, whereby the student, accepts a training course, and they can then log into the training course, they can complete the training course, and then receive a credential to kind of attest that they have done that. So that's a very kind of specific example. But again, it shows all of the thinking and how it links in with the current infrastructure and the Authenticator app. And then, I mean, I think on the next slide, I think one of the things that's really exciting, and this is obviously kind of a little bit more of a technical look at things,
Mhm.
but ultimately what we're talking about here is this is an extension for the Open Edge Analytics platform, and an extension for Azure Active Directory. So we're not saying to universities or to education providers or training providers or whoever it may be that they need to rip this up and start again. The whole point of the OEA is, as far as I understand it, and again, I don't work for Microsoft, so we would have to speak to them to get obviously a greater level of granularity, but they basically do a lot of the integration work. So APIs and hooks into existing systems. You
Mhm.
can then take the parts of the data and the information that is pertinent that can get kind of massaged, which is what we see in that kind of compute section there. So the middle white boxes, and ultimately turn that into the verified credential. And again, Candatas are there to kind of implement the solution, make the transition really, really smooth, and make the use cases come to life, because that's ultimately what it's all about.
That is a beautiful way of explaining this. Thank you, Gillian. And it kind of leads me into, just verifiable credentials in action. We are
Mm,
in this webinar, we're talking about it in terms of higher education. But some of the rollouts we've done have been across healthcare, when we've done it for and sort of nuclear power and engineering. So it's just I think it's amazing that we're in this state that we can actually do this. It was only to think it was just maybe a year ago
yeah.
that it was announced that was it Ignite that they
Yeah.
said, yeah, we're rolling this out now, and we're one of the partners working with them, which is fantastic. And we're delighted Sellafield is an example of a
Yeah.
really high risk environment and highly secure environment. Their ask was mostly, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the tracking of training credentials, and those are professional training credentials. Do you want to go into more detail on that? Because I think that's an outstanding case study.
Yeah, no, no, for sure, and it's a super exciting project, and again, I just don't know if we can get any higher stakes really than a nuclear power. It's quite
Yeah.
kind of feels quite, yeah, feels quite quite important. So um I think what's been really interesting about Sellafield is, like you're saying, it's 11, the solution is kind of designed for their entire workforce going forward. So this is 11,000 employees, so not an unsubstantial amount of people. And really what we're looking to do there is, again, create that anchor of who the identity of that employee is, because obviously that's vastly important.
Yeah.
But then the extension was not only being able to say that you are who you say you are, but actually you have the qualifications that are in date, that are current, that are what you need to do your job. And basically that you are the person that you say you are, and you can do the things that you are being asked to do. Now, my understanding is, like, the management and the admin overhead of that was just a lot, right? A lot of man hours, a lot of time spent, complexity, like challenges with, dealing with training providers, all of the things that you can imagine would be required to kind of handle that many training credentials or training, yeah, training awards for that many employees.
Yeah.
So the solution is that now, the employees have the ability to have a passport whereby they have their identity and they have the training qualifications that are linked to that. They can, be onboarded and offboarded. They can, use it as a tool, as it were, to say, right, look, what qualifications do I have? What am I missing? When did they expire? All of that stuff is kind of managed within the passport and really allows the staff to be a lot more engaged with their training record. And one of the reasons that this is so important is that, as we've seen in other industries as well, is we want people to move around, right?
Hmm.
So especially especially in this hybrid world, some people will be closer to certain locations, and we need to be able to facilitate that. So being able to kind of, as I say, have this passport and it be deployed at Sellafield, but it be applicable in somewhere like Dunray or another site is just really important because it obviously facilitates the movement of those people going forward. So a really cool project to be part of, something that we learned an absolute ton on, but also as I say, just this idea of like the sheer admin burden and what that looks like going forward is it's a real game changing piece of technology.
I can see that, and I think we saw that most evidently with our next case study, which is in healthcare, and it was the
Yeah,
POC we did with Microsoft and Blackpool Teaching Hospitals, part of the NHS. And I think the scary thing is you think of the scale that the NHS has as an employer, and it's such a massive organization with sub organizations, and each
yeah,
one acts. Every NHS trust is its own employer almost.
yeah,
And if you think of, again, pandemic hits, and you've got to shift clinicians or medical workers across different parts of the country, and they have to reprove all their work every single time, all their licenses, all the evidence that they've worked so hard to. I mean,
yeah.
what is a time scale that we've seen that's shrunk for them using something like verifiable credentials?
Yeah, yeah. So like you're saying, so the project was largely around kind of a COVID response. So in partnership with Microsoft and our sister company, SiteKit, we worked with the NHS to come up with a solution to get people moving, like you said. So the pandemic did not discriminate in terms of, well, it, actually it did, I suppose. It was not a blanket policy in terms of, there was obviously difference in load in different NHS trusts and sheer volume of people. Like, the ability to move people between different NHS trusts basically became so paramount. And my understanding was that, prior to the passport being available, it was like a 2-week onboarding process minimum. So 2 weeks to be able to get a doctor or a clinician, like you mentioned, able to actually perform their job. To prove all of the different levels of qualification and attainments that they had. Yeah, obviously the pandemic, there just simply wasn't time for that. So the digital staff passport really was designed to excuse me, was to create that record of that particular member of staff, show what the qualifications that they had, and enable them to get onto to kind of wards and perform like key tasks and really support where it was required.
I think that's brilliant stuff, to be honest. And I know I keep saying this is empowering, but it really is because it puts you in control. You know, you can self-serve, and nowadays we expect as consumers in general to be able to self-serve. I want to be able to manage my accounts. I want to be able to just live my life and do
Yeah,
what I have to as quickly as possible so I don't have to waste time.
and I think
Um,
it's, to bring it back to obviously kind of the education space as well. One of the things that I thought seems so abundantly obvious to me, especially when it was all around the vaccination program, was, okay, you might be a third or a fourth year medical student, and yes, you're not a doctor, but you've certainly done a lot of injections and things
mhm.
like that, and you've been, clinically in clinical environments, you've been exposed to that. So in some respects, having a passport or having the ability to have that transcript and have that data and that information on your phone would allow a student to potentially go in and support and help in that sort of clinical environment where they do have skills and they do have, a lot of value to add. But technically speaking, they're not doctors. So again, making sure that this is part of an ecosystem, employer, employee, students, all of that coming together to really create that ecosystem is just, it's so important.
That is excellent. Thank you, Gillian, for actually taking the time to go through a lot of this. So what we'll do just now is I will flick over to our chat just to see if there are any questions. We're basically at the end of this, but thank you for providing all that detail, Julian.
Apologize for choking.
Just,
Goodness.
oh, you're fine.
Mm.
Let me just have a look at our chat if I can. So,
Okay. Oh, I just saw a question pop up. So, I think it was around how
yes.
how students can comply. Is that correct? Is that what I saw? It
So the
popped up on the
question
screen.
is, the technology is quite impressive. How can we ensure that students are complying with the new procedures?
Yeah. So I think for me, it is all about, making it firstly user friendly, easy to deploy. It's obviously on students' phones, but it's also running on the rails that they already know. So, for example, when they get their Office 365 login, for example, this just becomes an extension of it. So the fact that, as I say, we are working very closely with Microsoft on this, I think, it just, as I say, extends already known technology providers and technology solutions in just a different way. But it kind of talks to a little bit of the RMIT example, right? Of being able to prove your identity and then take it to a retail store on campus and buy some swag and buy some merchandise at a discounted rate. I think it is about that ecosystem play and people understanding that if you prove this information, then you can benefit on the back of it. So I think it's just about understanding that, and that for me is very much about user experience, about customer experience. It's all the things that are probably being done within the university environment in other areas, like how do you have that great admissions experience, or how do you make your website all singing, all dancing, like
Hmm.
all that good stuff. It's probably applying a lot of those principles to the adoption and usage of this. But again, I think it's just about it is a newer technology, and it is still developing, but it's about understanding really what's the problem that this is trying to solve. And I think that if we can all come together to do a good job of explaining that and explaining the benefits, then student adoption, I don't see being a problem. It just has to be about those benefits. So if you can use this to prove your identity and your qualifications, which is going to be potentially easier from an employability point of view, because again, you can take away a lot of the binary, the have you got your qualifications, have you not, yes, no kind of questions, and then start looking
Yeah,
at the person as an individual. That's massive. Like I, when I'm thinking about job applications, I want to be seen as the person. I don't want to be seen as a list of attainments necessarily. And I appreciate they're necessary, but they don't necessarily give that full picture, right?
exactly. Exactly. So I think that is the only question we've received so far. So if there are no further questions, we'll close out the session. Thank you all again for listening and attending. If you do have any follow-ups, sometimes it comes to you later. Um, on the screen, you'll have my details and Gillian's details. Just fire us a message anytime. For those that would like a more in-depth discussion or a briefing, a one-to-one briefing, just look out for our post-event email and you can easily book in some time with us. So thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and we'll speak to you soon, I hope. Take care and goodbye.
Thanks so much.